And now, to meet the author, Colin Harper. Well, first of all, Colin, while you're getting your technical staff to assist, congratulations on writing the book.
Thank you.
It looks big.
Thank you.
Tell us slightly about why John McLaughlin is worthy of such an honour of you spending so much of your time to research and create a book which in many ways is going to become part of his legacy forever.
Well, interesting point, legacy, and thank you very much, whoever that was with the thing there. It's taken me 45 years to have people. And I don't even know their names. But yeah, legacy, it's an important thing, and what Jim was reading there, it's an important thing in music, certainly if you create a body of work that resonates with people at the time and is deemed by succeeding generations to have some kind of worth. And the interesting thing about the Mahavishnu Orchestra was John exploded on the world stage in 1971 with this band that literally within 6 months of nowhere were playing the Carnegie Hall, literally. And that band fell apart 2 years later, and he formed the second Mahavishnu Orchestra, and before 2 years had gone, he'd got fed up with that and he'd moved on. And, you know, CBS Records just couldn't believe it because, you know, I have a quote from someone saying that you know, whenever he first split the first band, you know, $1 million went down the toilet. And the second band, the same thing happened. But he's one of those guys, and you'd probably know this being a jazz man, he's one of those guys who's got to follow his muse, that ever-transcending beyond thing that Carol Shive, his former colleague, was talking about. He had a 12, 13-year professional career before 1971, and it's almost like he's the anti-Zelig, you know, the anti-version of Woody Allen Zelig, who appeared, you know, this curious character who appears in the background of photographs of all the historical events. I mean, John was actually at most of the historical events in swinging London in the 60s, and even in the trad jazz and skiffle world in the 50s. He was making music professionally in London. He was going through, you know, the first rhythm and blues boom. You know, he was on one of the some of the early Rolling Stones demos. He, you know, made records with Petula Clark, with Tom Jones, with Engelbert Humperdinck. He was doing that, and in the evening he was doing free jazz and psychedelic rock music at UFO and the Middle Earth Club. He was at Ronnie Scott's doing mainstream jazz. He was, you know, he was at the beginnings of British soul music with Ronnie Jones, Herbie Goins. You know, the sort of people that influenced Gina Washington and so on. So he was in all of these scenes, and he was there at the start of so many things, but he barely left a trace in the public consciousness, you know, and that's almost impossible to do. You can't imagine somebody having such a long career in the 60s, you know, this era that we all look back to in music as being, you know, like the Wild West of music, you know, pioneer times when, you know, the music led the industry, when anything was possible, you know, when major labels would actually give, you know, somebody 50 grand to make a free jazz record because they didn't know what they were doing. They thought, you know, the music, you know, these guys must know where they're at. You know, we just throw them some money, something will work. And John managed to have this career, barely leave a trace. There's hardly any photographs, but yet he did make a few recordings. You know, the footprints are there if you look for them. You just have to do an awful lot of looking, and nobody had done that looking before. And then when he had the Mahavishnu Orchestra in 71, it lasted for 4 years. Then he moved on to the next thing. And it's like it's been virtually forgotten except by aficionados, and yet at the time it was, if you were a musician, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, you knew that was the level you aspired to. You know, it was not only a band for musicians, it was you know, they were selling out 10,000-seater arenas. They were doing that across America. They did something like 500 gigs in 2.5 years. And they were all, you know, fierce geniuses. You know, Jan Hammer, who went on to do the Miami Vice soundtrack, and Jerry Goodman on violin, Rick Laird on bass, and Billy Cobham on drums. You know, they were the fastest, the loudest, the best. They had top 20 albums in Britain and America. They were playing bizarre modes from India. They were playing bizarre time signatures. They were incorporating musical ideas from Bartók and Webern and you know, all these 20th century European art music composers. And it was so far away from anything to do. I mean, in the 70s, most people were just doing blues rock and playing in stadiums, and, you know, Lynyrd Skynyrd and the Doobie Brothers and all that kind of thing. It's, you know, toe-tapping stuff. And And the Mahavishnu Orchestra played with those sort of people, but there was nothing in their music that would link them, you would think, to the blues, and yet it was a development of that. It was musically avant-garde, and yet somehow it connected with the masses. But it connected for a brief period with the masses, and it led the way musically for a period, and then it was gone. And the legacy thing is interesting because nowadays, of course, you've got, in a sense now, there's an information overload, so everybody's fighting to be heard, fighting to be seen, fighting to get their stuff recognised. Modern artists and artists from the past who, want to sustain their legacy on CD or lossless MP3s or DVD, whatever there is. And Robert Fripp from King Crimson, for example, I mean, there's a man from the John McLaughlin era, from a band that played with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He has led the way, really, in being a cottage industry who curates his own legacy. Just this last couple of years, there's been a series of 40th anniversary King Crimson records, remixed in 5.1 surround sound and coming with, in some cases 17 bonus discs of material, literally, tombstones of work. And that is completely at the other end of the scale from John McLaughlin, who is so much looking towards tomorrow that he really has literally no interest in the past. If people say to him, I really loved the Mahavishnu Orchestra, or I really loved Shakti, or I loved whatever you did 20 years ago, 10 years, he'll say, oh, thank you very much, but he doesn't play any of that stuff, and he's not really interested in talking about it, and it's extraordinary because it's if you had done a fraction of the things he did in his dark ages in the 60s, let alone at his peak period in the 70s, you would bask in that forever. You would be playing that repertoire forever.
Critics said that
fascinating.
Critics said that he peaked with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, obviously in terms of prestige and things like that, although his name is still very much fond in music circles. And what's your own humble opinion, having researched to such an extent that you have to complete this book?
Well, I think there's two things. Yes, I believe he did peak with the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the early 70s, and the book stops in 1975 because I was really interested in two things. One, what were the factors that led somebody to create a body of work that seems to be immortal? Because the work itself has outlasted, in a way, the artifacts of their recordings. Because it's now, you can now buy CDs and go to concerts featuring, flamenco troupes and string quartets and big bands and solo pianists, and all of this repertoire from 3 or 4 years of recordings has been endlessly reinterpreted by different musical units, and it's a very special kind of repertoire, and it seems it seems to me that whatever he did after that, no matter how great and interesting, it hasn't resonated with people as much as those few years of recordings. And so my kind of interest was what led him to that. How did he peak at that period? How did that music become written? How did it resonate so much with people? And not only that, but what had he been doing in the 60s? How did you get from Whitley Bay in growing up in Whitley Bay in the 1940s to going through all these great scenes in swinging London in the 60s, playing on all these great records? And how do you manage to keep so below the radar, for the first 12 years of your career, and then suddenly move to America? And literally 2 days after landing in America in February 1969, he was playing on Miles Davis's "In a Silent Way," which is, as you would know, it's an iconic record. And from that point on, once he moved to America, he made countless records over the next 2 or 3 years with the New York jazz people. Wayne Shorter and Larry Coryell and Joe Farrell and several with Miles Davis, and made a couple of solo records, and then the Mahavishnu Orchestra started, and it was a case of what happened. How did that happen? Who was the person who did that, and what are the factors that led to this extraordinary music being made? And if he's not interested in his legacy, I am.
Well, you are, and you've obviously charted it. You've charted it in a book. I'm interested.
How do you know that?
Oh, I just know. I know these things. It's my job to not recall. But I mean, you've charted it in the book. This is 2013. It's going to be published in 2014. And this is the internet world. It's the e-commerce world. It's everything. It's the way of people downloading. Soon we'll be able to put glasses on and read the book while driving the car. You have embraced that. Tell us how the format of the book works.
Well, yes, a free hologram of John McLaughlin playing exclusive material will appear in your Google glasses. No, it's interesting. There was a particularly amusing meeting with my publisher and my agent at a very drafty St Pancras train station cafe about a year or so back, and I was about a year into writing the book, and it took about 18 months, and we're meeting the publisher really because at that point I was up to about 1965, and it was clear the thing was going to be monolithic, and publishers fear the word count. So anyway, I just have this memory of this particularly drafty St Pancras cafe, and none of us really had any money, so we probably made a single coffee last about 3 hours. A bit like Ralph McTell and his guy in the tea shop. Every tea lasts a lifetime, or whatever. But anyway, we're chatting away, and I kept enthusing wildly, as I'm sure you can imagine, and saying things like, "Look, you realise this is going to be over 200,000 word." And the publisher Tom, he's a lovely man. Tom is sort of sitting there shaking his head, going, The longest we've done is 190,000 words. Yes, Tom, but it's going to be 250,000 words. I went, really? The longest we've done is 190,000 words. I said, look, Tom, at some point somebody said to Jimi Hendrix, look, we've never recorded distortion before. Yes, but you can. You can do that. And to Tom's credit, he said, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can. You do what you want, and see if you can cut some of it down and sideline some of it to an ebook version. So, to cut a long story short, the print version has ended up being 215,000 words long, and the ebook comes with an additional 100,000 words because it can. And I mean, some of it is hilarious. I mean, one of the bonus chapters in the ebook is about John's membership of a unit called the Tony Meehan Combo, which he was a member for about 2.5 months in 1963. And he's never once mentioned it, and I still managed to get 8,000 words on that subject, But I mean, the thing is, John has never mentioned it, but the thing is, that was his first recording that was released. It was a top 40 single. He was on Ready, Steady, Go and Thank Your Lucky Stars, the pop shows of the day with it. He did a theatre tour for, I can't remember how many dates, 35 dates, something like that, with people like Cilla Black on the bill, and who else? Jerry and the Pacemakers. Del Shannon was topping the bill, I think, and Duffy Power. And we're going to hear some of Duffy Power's music a bit later on. Duffy later collaborated with John, wrote some songs together, and so on. And the Duffy Power thing is another interesting example. I interviewed John in 1997 and asked him about the Duffy Power collaborations he did, because there were plenty of recordings, and they co-wrote 4 or 5 songs. And let me see. My research indicated that they performed 4 advertised gigs together as a band, several other advertised gigs as a duo. They had something like 8 recording sessions, a BBC World Service broadcast, recorded at least 15 extant songs, and wrote 5 songs together. And when I interviewed John about this in '97, I said, "So, Duffy Power?" He said, "Well, really, he was just somebody I shared musical interests with. There was, there's nothing really there, And yeah, John, there's a career there. There's acts on the Chicken in a Basket circuit doing best of the '60s hits with far less of a body of work than this one sentence of of throwaway. Nothing. So he's a fascinating fellow in that he seems to have so little interest in the past. And he did say on one occasion, he said, really nothing happened for me between leaving the Graham Bond organization in 1963 and moving to America in 1969. Now that's the whole of the swinging 60s, and I think I've managed to write, I don't know, I'm sure there's about 160,000 words of that nothing that happened to John McLaughlin.
Well, we do want you to say 160,000 words, and there are 3 more interview slots, so we're gonna leave it right there. But ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful body of work. It's a research It's taken a lot of Colin's time, and it's obviously something that's very special to him, and I hope it's going to become very special to you. We're going to hear more about it later on. Another round of applause, please, for the author, Colin Harper.